Okay. Are you about ready to go? Or? Yes. Okay. Let's see, where is
I don't know what, I know the games, I know.
Chautauqua in upstate New York. I was 100 years old. She I can't hear anything. Oh, now I can hear something. Can you hear something now? Is this Verizon? Can you hear me now? I'm changing to Sprint. Oh, Sprint works down here. Verizon doesn't. There we go. Actually, they tell me you have. Well, a few more things about Tim. Is that he was the associate director of the Morton Arboretum in Philadelphia before he and Rose retired out here. I'm sure there's far more story in between. I'm going to catch up now that this is live and it is being recorded, and I think it may be zoomed around the world, so I want to get out of the way. Our speaker tonight, Tim Tomlinson, former president of Historic Elsah Foundation, author of The History of the New Western Piasa Chautauqua, and a lover of the great Chautauqua. And his talk will be about both their history and their context and their relevance today. So please welcome Tim Tomlinson.
Thank you, John. I served on the Historic Elsah Foundation board for over 2 decades, and part of that was under the leadership of John. And so he and I, in a way, go back a ways, and I'm always happy to be in his company. I'm going to ask Jeff to advance the slides, so that may get a little bit, I hope that doesn't inconvenience any of us, but that's the way, in a way, we're going to go. The word Chautauqua is basically untranslatable. If you Google it, it'll say it means 2 moccasins tied together, or a bag with a string in the middle. But no one really knows. It's an Iroquois word. And since there's no Rosetta Stone for Native American languages, we really don't know what it means. It refers to a piece of land or an area in northwestern New York State, west and north of the Finger Lakes, a lake that is about 15 miles long and 3 miles wide at its widest point, and a mile wide at its narrowest point, called Chautauqua Lake, or Lake Chautauqua. It's about 45 miles from Erie, Pennsylvania, and if you go due north from the Chautauqua Lake, you'll walk into Lake Erie. It's celebrating its 150th anniversary this year. And I've indicated that it's an American religious, educational, and social movement. And I'll speak to some of those things as we go through this discussion. Jeff, could you advance, please? Now, 150 years ago, we find the beginning of the Mother Chautauqua in Lake Chautauqua, New York. It was a wildly successful movement. Within 15 to 20 to 25 years, over 300 similar types of establishments, institutions, had grown up in different parts of the country, mostly in Ohio, in Illinois, in Indiana, in Iowa, but also in New England and as far west as California. These were called daughter Chautauquas or sister Chautauquas because they chose to organize themselves around the same way that the institution, the mother institution, is another one of those big bangs. I really felt threatened, by the way, when all that noise hit. if I said, do they really want me? There also occurred during the period of what I call the movement period, about 50 years, from the 1870s into the 1920s, there occurred a parallel kind of operation called the circuit or tent Chautauquas. Now, if you think about the circus traveling through the country in the 20th century, probably even still at some point, then it was an intellectual or a cultural kind of circus. It moved from town to town, and it booked its speakers, its musicians, its artists, its storytellers, and so on. And there's a wide and rich history of the 10 Chautauquas. Think about this. Think about sometime in the middle of June, a week-long event being held up in Carrollton, Illinois. And then the following week, it moves down to Alton. And the week after that, it moves down over to Belleville or Edwardsville. And that's how the 10 Chautauquas service the cultural, the educational, the intellectual, and sometimes the spiritual needs of the people in the country at that time. There's a lot of literature. One of the books, the title of this book strikes my fancy, and I think it incorporates what we know about this movement, and it's called Morally We Roll Along. In the 1970s, there was an effort by the National Endowment for the Humanities to recreate the Chautauqua. This was the bicentennial of the United States. It was the centennial, about the centennial of the Chautauqua movement. And so there was this effort of creating a kind of 10 Chautauqua idea where you'd have in Kirkwood, Missouri, in the park, a big tent would be put up, and individuals would be brought in, and these individuals would represent Mark Twain and so on, and they would put on a show similar to the Chautauquas. And today, if you go onto Google and you look for the Chautauqua Trail, you'll see that the idea of the Chautauqua is still alive and buzzing because all over the country now, a storefront, a small park, an unused church turned over into some kind of a social, intellectual, cultural oasis that people can come to and participate, join together, and so on, in the spirit of the Chautauqua movement. Slide, Jeff, please. None of these historical movements spring like Phoenix from full blown, or Athena full blown out of the ashes. The Chautauqua movement had its antecedents in the Lyceum movement, an educational movement that coexisted and was brought about in part by the Industrial Revolution in this country in the early 19th century, and in particular in New England, which had long been in the forefront of educational opportunities for different people. And so this is like the Lyceum movement was an afternoon and evening school for young men and young women who were taken off the farms, brought into the factories in Lawrence and Lowell and Haverhill, Massachusetts, and given then an opportunity to better themselves through this kind of a movement. There was then this level of interest. And then next. And well, we have some technical difficulties. The other antecedent for the Chautauqua movement was the camp meeting. Now, you think about the growth of this country in the 19th century. that we had people living on both shores and not much in the middle. And so you have the westward movement, and part of that movement was spurred on by economics, finding land to turn into agricultural opportunities, but also the opportunity to spread religion. And so you have an evangelical kind of activity taking place in the camp meetings. The camp meetings and the Lyceum both preceded what I've been calling the Chautauqua movement. But let me make the note. The camp meetings still exist today. A very vibrant camp meeting can be found on Martha's Vineyard, Oaks Bluff. And at one point, it called itself a Chautauqua, and then they decided it didn't want to be a Chautauqua anymore, and it went back to the camp meeting. But there's also an important one in Illinois, just outside of Chicago, in the suburb of Des Plaines, that goes back to the 1860s. And so Martha's Vineyard, 1837, Des Plaines in the 1860s, again, all of them preceding the Chautauqua. Now, can you go back? Okay, thank you, Joe. The permanent assemblies are what I really want to talk about. These are the Chautauquas that grew up emulating or imitating the mother Chautauqua, founded in 1874, and they continue to exist today. There is an opportunity for you to get into some kind of a camper van and drive around this country and visit at least 10 permanent assemblies. Next slide, please. Okay, the first place, these are listed chronologically, not geographically. So you'll be jumping around as we go. The Ocean Grove Campground, and we'll show you some images of that a little bit later, goes back into 1869, if I'm reading my notes up here correctly. The Chautauqua Institution in Western New York, 1874. The Bayview Association is a Methodist assembly that is located north at the northern end of Lake Michigan, Grand Traverse Bay, by Petrosky, Michigan. It has over 400 cottages. It is part of the assembly. A major highway drives right through the middle of it and doesn't bother it as far as its programming is concerned. It continues to maintain its activities. And it is one of the most beautifully landscaped properties you're going to find in this whole group. If you're traveling in New England, just before you come to Portland, Maine, you're on Route 1, you pass Kennebunkport, where the Bushes had their family summer home, and you'll come to Ocean Point. And there's a small Chautauqua there that was organized in the 1890s as part of Baptist religion. If you're going to Atlanta and you drive between Nashville and Chattanooga, you drive up the mountain and then down the mountain. At the top of the mountain, Mont Eagle, the Mont Eagle Sunday School Assembly is a functioning Chautauqua today. Not a mile and a half up the road is the community which is known as New Piasa, Chautauqua, was originally known as the Piasa Bluffs Assembly and was founded in 1885. We'll learn some more about that. There is a Chautauqua north of Toledo on Lake Erie, and it's called Lakeside. From Memorial Day to Labor Day, it's a gated town. It's not a gated community, it's a gated town. you pay an admission to go through to get into the town, and then you move through the town enjoying its benefits. After that, it ends the gated community, and because the Chautauqua season is open or is over at that point. Near Hershey, Pennsylvania, if you're interested in a chocolate tour, about 70 miles from Philadelphia and part of the way to Harrisburg, the capital of Pennsylvania, is the Mount Gretna Chautauqua, founded in 1892. It sits side by side with a camp meeting, and both of them go back into the late 19th century and continue to exist today. Rose and I were driving to Bayview, the Michigan Chautauqua, one summer, and we by accident found a Chautauqua in Northeast Indiana near the city of Remington. It's in the middle of a cornfield. It operates for 3 weeks in the summertime, and the rest of the year, well, you know, you can go and visit your cottage or whatever. There is no program, but there it is, 1895. It counts itself as a Chautauqua. It develops programs that relate to the idea of Chautauqua and so on. And I should make a note that all of these permanent assemblies that I've mentioned at this point had a religious orientation. The original Chautauqua was founded by Methodists. The Chautauqua in Maine had a Baptist orientation. The Southern Chautauqua had an Episcopal orientation. The Colorado Chautauqua was founded by members of the Texas Education Association in the major cities of Dallas and Houston. They wanted some place to get away for summer school. And so they created a Chautauqua in Boulder, Colorado, that still exists. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go forward. All right, could I have another slide, please? In 1874, we had the founding of the original Chautauqua Institution. And can we go one more, please, Jeff? The acknowledged founder of the original Chautauqua is a Methodist minister who later became a Methodist bishop. His name is John Heil Vincent. And Vincent was connected to Illinois, for example. He had a parish in Galena at one point, while Ulysses Grant also lived in Galena, was a member of Vincent's parish, and the two men became fast friends, which has import for what happened in the later life of at least Vincent and the Chautauqua Institution. Vincent was, I think of him as a visionary. He was able to take this Chautauqua in New York and to create there something that people wanted to imitate, but he was also able to create an institution that had wide significance. He got from the New York legislature the right to give classes, to give degrees. He just put together that kind of thing. He was supported in his work by the next slide. And one more, please. He was supported in his work by a man who had some money. And this is Lewis Miller. He was an Ohio industrialist. And he began his career as a teacher. He was really interested in education and religion. But he was lucky enough to get involved in the creation of farm machinery, shockers and reapers. And out of the money that Miller made through his work in this level, he was able to pour that back into it. He paid forward or gave back, whichever you like, to the community. And next. This is the one of the buildings in the Chautauqua, Mount Gretna in Philadelphia, outside of Philadelphia in near Lebanon. And I bring it to your attention because there are 4 pillars here. And I've used that kind of model as, if I have you understand what the Chautauqua movement was all about. There was what I call the platform. We wouldn't here call it the kind of grasp of social issues that were important in the day. There was an emphasis on education. There was an emphasis on religion. And there was an emphasis on recreation as it affected family life. Not recreation per se. We're not talking about American football. We're talking about family recreation and families together. Could I have the next one, please? Next one. So what were these characteristics of the movement? And as you're listening, if you kind of think about this, a Chautauqua, not a mile and a half from here, and asking yourselves, how does this fit in with what we're looking at in the overall picture of the Chautauqua? Well, first of all, most of the Chautauquas are in a rural setting. That was a choice. The Texans wanted to get out of the heat of Dallas, but people wanted to get out of Brooklyn and New York City and Philadelphia, and they wanted to go to a place where it was cooler and life was calmer and less unpredictable. These were urban patrons. The people who put together these permanent assemblies, they came from cities. It also was middle class. Simultaneously, we're going through the Gilded Age. This is the age of Rockefeller, Gould, Carnegie. It is also the age of people in the middle class who have a job, are raising a family, and have some disposable income. They have some money that they can spend on enjoying themselves and bettering themselves. It was Protestant, non-denominational, but almost exclusively Protestant. Education was seen as a way forward. And the idea, of paying it forward, if I use that, I like to use that phrase, of giving something to the people who are coming ahead of, after you. So that's how all this put together in that platform. The person who probably most embodied it, because he was everywhere, was William Jennings Bryan. Because Bryan was a late 19th century politician who ran for president 3 times. In 1896 against McKinley, in 1900 against McKinley, and in 1908 against William Howard Taft. He lost all 3 elections, but he was the voice of the common people, and he was the person who best embodied this business of justice, humanity for all people. Next one, please. He had an amazing career, but a lot of it was funded by Chautauqua, because what he would do is he would sign up to come to. He was at this Chautauqua above us 4 different times. And so he would come and he would give a talk, and he would get on a train and he would go to another Chautauqua. That was his, that was his summer routine when he wasn't running for president. I find his career really linked with that of Teddy Roosevelt. kind of alike in a way because both interested in social justice, both interested in improving the lot of the common man. But, and Bryant, whom you see in this image, along with Teddy Roosevelt, was going to run for president in 1912 for a fourth time. And he was talked out of it by Woodrow Wilson and the Democratic Party. And he was promised the position of Secretary of State. So he chose not to run. Teddy Roosevelt chose to run, split the Republican vote, and Wilson became president. In 1916, when it looked like this country was going to go to war, Bryant resigned from the Wilson cabinet saying, I'm a pacifist, I'm not going to go along with this business of going to war. And so that kind of marked his career. You think of him as this reformer in a way, that he ran for president, he was Secretary of State for the United States, he was involved in the monkey trial in Tennessee in the 1920s, and then he passed on. Another person who was part of this circuit, moving from town to town, was Robert La Follette, a senator from Wisconsin, who was really instrumental in terms of things like direct election of senators, and the whole progressive movement that came out of Wisconsin was headed in most part by La Follette. So the platform, could I have in the next, one more? That's for La Follette. I'm sorry, I have it up here and I didn't see it there. Next, please. So we were looking at what Americans were interested in the first part of the 20th century when this movement was going on: religious tolerance, racial tolerance, women's suffrage, the vote in 1919, child labor laws, slum clearance, court reform, and the conservation of resources. This is, and there is a connection between Teddy Roosevelt and the Chautauquas, because Roosevelt was an ardent conservationist, as in the same time as a contradiction, a contraire, if you will, an ardent hunter. The building that most typifies the Chautauqua to me is the auditorium, or sometimes called the tabernacle, because this movement had religion as a part of its foundation. And this is a picture or a print of the Chautauqua Auditorium. This auditorium was built in 1890. In my mind, it is the oldest long-living extant Chautauqua in the auditorium in the United States. All of the other permanent assemblies have auditoriums today. They're either new, they've been moved from one place to another, they are not the original. This is on the original site, and it's pretty much, it was expanded in 1904, but it's pretty much the same building as it was in 1890, but the tabernacle. The auditorium. This is the auditorium at the top of the mountain as you're going between Nashville and Chattanooga. This is in Mont Eagle. It seats 6,000 people. Now, where are they going to get all those people from? Well, it almost never is filled, but it does have, it's home to a symphony orchestra from a local university, Sewanee of the South, and it has plays and so on. But this auditorium. This is in Ocean Grove, New Jersey. This seats 10,000 people. If you look there, you see the big cross at the top of the auditorium. And if you were standing here and looking out towards you, you're about 400 yards from the ocean. And that's the setting for the auditorium here. And this is the auditorium in Colorado. This was again, the only Chautauqua that doesn't have a religious orientation, But this auditorium was fast built within a year to open in 1892, I believe it was, 1898 for July 4th. The second thing I want to share with you about the Chautauqua movement and the permanent assemblies is that they were interested in education. This country has been one of the places in the world where education is really important. Whether you think the first university in this country was William and Mary or Harvard is not relevant. There was a university here within 50 years of the colonists landing here. The public school system is something in this country that is unique to many places. What you see here is a building in southern Florida on the Panhandle, Defuniak Springs, and it was once the headquarters of the Florida Education Association. What education meant, what Chautauquans were involved with, what they wanted to see happen, they wanted to see free textbooks. Next slide, please. They wanted to see summer school. They wanted to see balanced diet, physical fitness, phys ed, school lunch programs, lifelong learning, education for everybody, education, education, education. Could I have the next slide? Jefferson said, any nation that expects to be ignorant and free expects what never was and never will be. So the emphasis on education was pragmatic. It was not just something that, the English grand tour. This is not an English grand tour kind of mentality. This is let's get on with it. We can be better people. We can do things. We can make life better for people. Next slide, please. In New York, at the Chautauqua Institution, that idea was brought together in a physical building called the Hall of Philosophy. In the Chautauqua above us, there was at one time a building dedicated to be the Hall of Philosophy. And Vincent and the people he put together to make the Chautauqua Institution work, they created something called the Chautauqua Literary and Scientific Circle. Folks, that was the forerunner of online learning, because what this was a way you could live in Elsah and you could get a list of books that you were encouraged to read and take exams on, and then you would be given credit for that, and you would be given a certificate from the CLSC. It's the equivalent of a college degree at that time. And so the CLSC, next slide, please. And this group of people who are current day, I mean, this still works. This program still operates. Look it up. These are graduates. And here's a typical reading list, goes back a few years. Ken Starr had just finished a investigation of Bill Clinton. And so in 2002, there was a whole week that dedicated to the Supreme Court. And these are some of the other books that were part of the program for that year. So next. The religion was important. In Lakeside in Ohio, there is a chapel in the woods, in addition to several churches related to the community, to the Chautauqua community in the town. This is an Episcopal chapel in New York at the Chautauqua Institution. In the afternoons, it is the church for a small Korean church. So a single church being shared by different communities as they're going about it. The And most of the churches in the Mother Chautauqua, they also have large home-like structures that if you're a Catholic and you're visiting Chautauqua, one of the things you might do first is to contact the Catholic house and say, do you have room for me? And choose to stay there instead of somewhere else in the community. This is a chapel, a church-like chapel in Bayview, Michigan. Again, you begin to see the architecture, the stained glass windows, the circle. And this is an artist's rendition of a chapel here at New Piasa, Chautauqua, up the road, with a horse-drawn buggy and members of the community visiting the chapel. The Chautauqua here in in Illinois, New Piasa, Chautauqua, is a membership organization today. Wasn't always that way, but it is today. One of the questions that you're asked in order to be available for membership is, will you support the church? If you say no, then that ends the game. There's nothing to go on. So there is that emphasis on keeping religion important. Now, recreation and family life, the last of the pieces that I talked to you about. Good. And next slide, Jeff. This is the Chautauqua Spring. It exists today. It was used widely in the 20th century as a source of water during the wintertime. People like myself who would come up from St. Louis, and with my family, we'd spend the weekend in November or December. The water was turned off in the community. So in order to get drinking water, we would take gallon jugs and go down to the spring and fill it up and bring it back for drinking water. It was an important part of the community back in its founding period. Next, these are cabanas. They're in Ocean Grove. Remember that big auditorium I said you can look out to the ocean as you're standing there? Well, these cabanas they're like platform, they're tents, but they're not tents. I mean, they're physical structures. They're built on a platform. And in St. Louis, if you were in Dogtown, if you were on the hill, they might call them dog houses because there's one little one room wide and 1 or 2 rooms back. So this is part of how people live today here in the 21st century in Ocean Grove. But next one. These are larger dog houses. This is look at the ornate Victorian structures that you see here. If you're looking for a tour of Victorian architecture and you want eyes-on experience, then you go to someplace like Ocean Grove, and it's just like the Sisters in San Francisco. There's that kind of connection there. But if you go to the next one, please. It even goes down to the level of the birdhouse, so that the birdhouse is also decorated and organized in the same way as the larger house. So recreation, next slide. On Lake Erie, there is a lot of boating. It's pretty cold up north of Toledo, so I'm not sure how much swimming goes on. But this is the boathouse in the lakeside Chautauqua. Next one, please. Next one. Next one. Here is Alton Lake. When I first started coming up into this area back in 1970, the body of water out here was called Alton Lake. And this is probably a 1950s and 1960s photograph up here taken up at Chautauqua of people watching sailboats out on the lake, so to speak. Next one. I suggested to you that all of the permanent assemblies were located in rural environments, and this is outside Lebanon, Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Chautauqua, a small pond and a swimming area. And all of our different Chautauquas have some kind of a playground for children. Again, sports being something that is a family orientation. Next one. Next one. I make one comment about the different Chautauquas. They're different, but they share certain similarities. I show you this map of the Boulder Chautauqua in Colorado Chautauqua in 1924 because the land the Chautauqua is owned by the city of Boulder. And it is leased every 15 years, the lease is renewed. But the ambience or they're together enough that this has not been a problem. Most of the Chautauquas, the land is owned by the communities and the home buildings are owned by the individual. And that's true of the Chautauqua above us, that's true of Mont Eagle, that's true of Bayview, and that's true of those places in I want to say Michigan. Yes. In Boulder, however, the community, the corporation owns the buildings. It doesn't own the land, but it owns the buildings. And if a cottage comes available for rent, the first move on the part of the corporation is to buy it. They're bringing in, they own almost 70% of the individual cottages now in Boulder in order to maintain control over it. I think of the Chautauqua in Boulder as just a lovely place to go. I mean, it's extraordinary. You're driving up, you're at the foothills. You're in the foothills of the Rockies. And there's this huge auditorium. There are about 70 or 80 cottages and some other large buildings. Out on the front lawn, there are maybe 50 or 60 young people, students from the University of Colorado sunbathing. I'm talking about sometime in May or in June. There's a restaurant to go to, and the auditorium built in 1898 today houses a kind of it's not the Colorado Symphony, but it's the Colorado Music Festival. My wife's sister for many years was the president of the Colorado Music Festival. And the festival had its own symphony orchestra. It hired a music director and so on. And our last visit there was to pay respects for the passing of my wife's sister. We went to the Colorado Symphony or the Colorado Chautauqua Auditorium to hear a performance led by a young man who was the music director when Patty was the president of the association. And it was stunned inside this building that goes back to 1898 when they played Copland's Fanfare for the Common Man. It was just magnificent. It was booming. And just, so I called it music with an altitude. And here you see it, the building itself. If you go to the next one, please. There we go. One more. There it is. And there we have the place. Now, quickly, New Piasa, Chautauqua. This, next slide. New Piasa, Chautauqua is one of 4 historic districts right along the river road between Grafton and Principia. The business district in Grafton, New Piasa, Chautauqua, Elsah, Principia campus. It was founded in 1885. It was founded by 2 Methodist conferences, and an education committee was given a charge, the charge written out. So there was no mistaken. You are to find a suitable location to establish a Western Chautauqua. Well, anything outside of New York is west. We are, however, we were eventually one of over 50 Chautauquas in Illinois. We were the 7th Chautauqua in Illinois. And I'm not sure this, but if my geography doesn't get too much inspection, we are on the westernmost part of Illinois. There you go. Don't hold me to that. The person I attribute as the founder of our Chautauqua, the new Piasa Chautauqua, was a Methodist divine, a minister, Civil War chaplain. His name was Benjamin St. James Fry. I did a study on him where I was able to watch him take up with the 63rd Ohio, which was his regiment, and they began to fight in 1861 down near Memphis, and he marched across all of Tennessee to be mustered out at Stone Mountain, not 50 miles from Atlanta, Georgia. A poet, a humanist, and part of it, that's why I think the whole idea of Chautauqua was something that he could embrace. He had that mentality, that sense of spirit, that idea that he could communicate to other people. And the programming that he and his colleagues were responsible for in the early days of our community, the Piasa Chautauqua community, reflected the values of Benjamin St. James Fry. He was assisted by another less educated minister, became a superintendent of religious education for Alton, worked in Effingham and Vandalia, got degrees at McKendree College, is buried in Lebanon, Illinois, next to McKendree University now. But we have a couple of documents that with I'm sorry. One more, please. With Van Treese's name on it. We have a baptismal certificate that he signed in 1923 at the big auditorium, the 1890 auditorium. He baptized a young boy from Fern Glen Valley. And then in 1925, he dedicated the cornerstone for the Chautauqua Chapel. He died in 1927. But think of it, folks. 1885, he was responsible for getting this Chautauqua off the ground. 40 years later, his hand is still heavy and loving in the community. Next, please. How did you get to Chautauqua? Well, this is the back, what we call the back gate now, but it wasn't then. It was you came down from the Elsah Road and into the valley towards the river. Most people probably came, and this is the train station at Chautauqua. It was on the line that came up from Alton to Grafton. I'm not talking the dinky. I'm talking trains. Yes, and so you have that, but you also see the steamboat there. Next. Next. In the beginning, people lived in tents. You could rent a tent on bare ground. You could get a platform for the tent. You could buy straw and so on. Next. But quickly we moved to developing houses. This is a cottage near the river called the Villa Mexico. It was built in 1905. It's called the Villa Mexico. It's not, doesn't look Mexican. It's a Gothic Victorian kind of design, but the man who had it built bought the Mexican pavilion from the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis, had it disassembled and shipped by boat up the river, where it then became the building materials for what became the Villa Mexico. So today, if I'm in that building, I'm looking at the door handles and the window jambs, and a lot of that stuff go back to that World's Fair. This is the Grange Hall. So individual homes. Now you had societal homes. The Grange, a kind of voluntary cooperative farmers organization that was very important in the agricultural communities. And this exists today. This is a 21st century picture. This is a French colonial chateau design built in 2007. It was built by a man who would become the mayor of Alton. He also owned the steamboat line. He built a pool up there. He contributed to the reorganization of the community. This is a two-story house that's near the auditorium. By 1910, you have more cottages than you have tents. Some organizations built houses. This is the Women's Christian Temperance Union. They had a house in Chautauqua, which was torn down in 1942 after it had gone through a period of disuse. But it gives you some indication of the orientation. This home exists today. It was called then in the turn of the century, the 19th to the 20th, the King's Daughters, because it was a benevolent organization that had its origin in the New York Chautauqua, and it represented men and women, the King's Daughters and King's Son, the King being Christ. They were interested in medicine and hospital care for people. So, and this is a boarding house that exists today. The porches don't exist any longer, but this is a 1912 picture of a boarding house. So think of it. Social organizations like the Grange and the WCTU, the individual houses, and now boarding houses for rent. A hotel that existed until 1969. Rose and I moved to Chautauqua in 1970. I never saw it, but it existed there until that year, a hotel on the grounds. And a huge hotel that had over 140 rooms, built in 1904, the same year as the World's Fair. 15 years later, it burned down and it was torn down and then not rebuilt. This is Piasa, Chautauqua in the late 1890s. You see the auditorium. Next, please. You see the auditorium. Street going up, that's 3rd Street. The auditorium grounds in front were part of the ambience of the oases where people collected in order to enjoy themselves. Next. A program book was developed every year that showed you sort of like the promo piece. But look at it, it's the Piasa Chautauqua Assembly. It's literary, social, and religious. And it's up front is to be kind of vacation that you're going to be looking at. And people came. I'm thinking of the old saw, if you build something, people will come. Well, they built the Chautauqua, people came. The young woman watching the steamboat come in, ready to unload a group of people. Next. Next. And so you had the family and the recreation kind of activities. I love this. I love this picture. The young ladies are ready to enjoy the pool next. And the pool was more than Olympic size back in 1904 when it was first built. Next. And you can see if you look carefully, you see the pool, and then behind it in the background, you see the big roof of the hotel up there. So you can see the juxtaposition of space. Okay. This was in the beginning not a money-making venture. It was always a limited corporation. It was listed in Illinois as a for-profit corporation, but there's no record of any dividend ever being paid or any profit being used other than to pour it back into the community. So you had these daily and weekly and I suppose monthly passes that you could get. Next. And so in 1907, I put together a list of statistics looking at the 1907 yearbook about what was it like at Chautauqua. And so somebody had already been influenced by Madison Avenue because the first statistic is hilarious. The auditorium seats about 500 people. So to say it had 2,500 in there, that's a little too much. But it did have an assembly office. It had a store. There was Spring Hotel was one of the main hotels. It had the big hotel. It had a hall of philosophy, a pool, a train station, a post office, a livery. You could rent horses there. And it had telephone and telegraph offices. So this was Chautauqua in 1907, a very going concern. The 1907 program was so ambitious. I have no idea what happened with the weather or so, but it was so ambitious that by 1908, they faced bankruptcy. They had to reorganize in 1909. I'm here. What? I can't see it, John. Okay, good, thank you. All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Next one, please. When I had, and you have to take this aside, when I was at Washington University, I had student teachers, and if they couldn't get through a lesson, what they did is they talked faster. I'm not going to do that. New Piasa, Chautauqua is going to celebrate its 140th year coming up. Are the Chautauquans an anachronism or is it a template? And I can't answer the question. I don't know. When I wrote the book, I talked about visionaries who were able to pull together the ideas of Chautauqua and make them happen in programs. But you know, we move ahead, and new people come in, and success doesn't happen because of buildings, and it doesn't happen because of past history necessarily. Happens because there are people who are willing to step up and say, okay, I believe in this and I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to work for it. So next. So I'll try to close with this. It's wonderful to tell how Chautauqua is synonymous with the American experience, heritage, imagination, promise, ideal, the best, the brightest. And Teddy Roosevelt is alleged to have said this, the most American thing in America. Next line. But which Rudyard Kipling said, I've been Chautauqua'd to death. What they are, the lawn tennis tabernacle of science and literature. He didn't know the word nerds, but if he did, he might have said it. I don't like Chautauqua. I don't know why, but I don't have time to find out. Next. For me, what it means is, and where it will succeed, the template, it has to be this: a generosity of spirit, civility, and belief that the effort is worthwhile and meritorious. Next. Current day, next. Next. This is what I see from my porch on a good night. And so thank you for your attention and the opportunity to speak with you. Yes.
Anyway, that would be a good way for you to come in. Western Chautauqua related to the transcendentalist, Thoreau and Emerson.
No, they preceded that. They would have had some impact on the museum. They had a lot of public buildings. Possibly a dozen people who figure out other homes are here says that this is a summer report. By technology was on. When I first was out there, Carol was over here. Was water top 1996 they found Carol on one. Yeah.
It's June, the cottage tour.
Can't hear you.
The cottage tour is on June 23rd, right? Sunday the 23rd.
All right, good. Another market.
June 23rd.
It's a summer experience for most people.
And then the last one.
Well, we started some of the earlier. The summer experience, there are about a dozen families year round. There's really no, I gotta have some stuff here, listening to me. In my opinion, not any interest in making it, an area where we hold a conference or some conference in some town and you say, oh, these people want to be interested, I think that's not. We don't have any staff. Oh, there's everybody's a volunteer. With the exception of, I think two ground people. So there's no organization of that. In history, you can probably find, and there are people who are still alive who know that in the 50s, people were able to come on the contract more freely. There were dances held down. You drive up the road, you see the building there. Well, that's the pavilion. You know, there's a dance hall, and people have dance there. So that's good. We had certain families over the past 20 or 30 years who have but there's no integration or whatever policy. In order to live there, to be there today, you have to be a member. You go all the time, the membership committee set up rules and regulations. I think we're that was the case. We have neighbors who live in Franklin Valley that we work with so that they have completely free access to the property that they need. And I think about how Chicago survived and how it's going to survive. In 1885, if you participated in this program, you signed up, you got a lease. You got a 99-year lease. I had a 19 year in 1970, I had a 99-year lease on my property, and that lease was going to terminate in 1984. Nothing had to do at all with 1984 by coincidence. In 1984, if nothing had happened, I would have owned my land, the land on which my cottage stood, be simple. And Chautauqua would have been gone. And that's true in Michigan and Tennessee and other places where the community has a kind of contract with the people that are part of it. So this was his contract. In the 1970s, there was an enormous amount of work done to try to renew that 99-year lease. And in 1979 and 80, that happened. I was stunned by it. Because that, in my book, I call this the greatest act of selflessness that I could imagine, because people gave up the opportunity to get this land that their cottage was on in a community that's on a river that had, I thought, great value, great economic value. That'll occur again in 2079. People who are there will have to make a similar choice. For that. Currently, it's about 27. There was a recent event last summer. There were several of us who turned 90, and we had a little party in our town hall, and my granddaughter was there, and so were the granddaughters and grandchildren of other people like myself. And so I spoke to them. I said, look, you're going to be I'm not going to be here in 27, to make the decision I made in 1979, but you are. And you're going to be the ones who are going to either keep this Chautauqua going or not. And so it was interesting. Donna. Let's see. If you can see this, I should have put a picture up on the wall. This is the cover of this book. The book is simple. It's a history of Chautauqua. It was published in 2010 on the 125th anniversary of the community. I hope somebody will write one in 2035 to be the 150th anniversary. There are only three people who have written a book, myself, another Chautauquan, and a young man in 1973 who was a Principia student that John Williams knew well. And when I was here with HEF, we were talking about reissuing Bill Fabian's book on the history of Chautauqua. Fabian was a senior at Principia at the time. And I said, no, I have an idea. So what I did is I talked to Bill Fabian. I went to him. He was over at the lower school at the time. And I said, I'm not going to rewrite your book. I'm going to print it exactly the way you wrote it. But where I think something else should be said, I'm going to add to your book. So the first 4 chapters of this, the Western Chautauqua, are a combination of Tim Tomlinson and Bill Fabian, italics versus non-italics, who are telling the story of the Chautauqua. And Bill Fabian's book was reprinted. And then the last part of it is what I was thinking about as we celebrated our 125th anniversary. And it was because I was connected with HEF that all this got done. And it was HEF and the Chautauqua Historical Society who put up the money to publish it. They got paid back handsomely. I gave them all the copyrights except the movie rights.